I knew a man once that had a phonographic memory.
He said photographic, not phonographic.
Yes, Esther, phonographic memory. He never could forget a song once he heard it on a Victrola.
When the Waltons premiered on CBS in 1972, it entered a crowded primetime lineup dominated by established hits. Yet, it steadily built momentum in the Nielsen ratings instead of collapsing under competition, eventually running for 9 seasons and over 200 episodes through 1981 while securing major industry recognition, including the 1973 Primetime Emmy Award for Outstanding Drama Series, and sustaining strong syndication and reunion film success well beyond its original run. Today, we are going beyond the familiar image of Walton's Mountain to uncover 20 weird facts you didn't know. The parents were secretly battling alcoholism. On screen, Ralph Waite as John Walton Sr. and Michael Learned as Olivia Walton projected an almost engineered stability, the kind of Depression-era moral certainty that made CBS's The Waltons a weekly anchor from 1972 onward. Off-camera, however, both actors were battling a serious dependency. Waite, who had spent time working as a social worker in New York before acting, struggled with alcoholism during the early and middle years of the series. Learned, who won 3 Primetime Emmy Awards for Outstanding Lead Actress in a Drama Series for her performance, also faced alcohol addiction during the production period. She later achieved sobriety in the late 1970s. The production schedule itself made concealment easier and harder at the same time. Long shooting days on Warner Brothers backlit sets in Burbank, California, meant the cast could maintain controlled appearances in public while internal pressures stayed largely invisible to audiences tuning in weekly on CBS Thursdays. Industry insiders at the time described The Waltons as a wholesome flagship drama, especially after it won the Primetime Emmy Award for Outstanding Drama Series in 1973. But behind the scenes, the story was quite different. Shocking, right? Well, we're just getting started. The network wanted it gone before it began. When The Waltons was greenlit by CBS in 1972, it was deployed into what executives internally treated as a controlled failure scenario. The network had already seen the 1971 TV film The Homecoming, A Christmas Story perform modestly well, introducing Michael Learned as Olivia Walton after Patricia Neal, who had originally played the role in the film, was unable to continue due to health complications following multiple strokes. Despite that success, CBS scheduled the show into the highly competitive Thursday 8 p.m. slot, a television battleground dominated by NBC's The Flip Wilson Show and ABC's The Mod Squad. Rural family dramas were considered commercially outdated. Urban sitcoms, variety programming, and crime series were driving advertising revenue, and a Depression-era mountain family story seemed structurally out of step with audience demand. But what happened next surprised everyone. Before we explore that part, let's see how the show stayed afloat. The fans who refused to let it die. By 1973, The Waltons had already entered an unusual feedback loop with its audience. The more uncertain CBS became about its long-term value, the more fiercely viewers treated it as non-negotiable television. Ralph Waite later described the phenomenon as something closer to civic resistance than fan loyalty. When early rumors of cancellation or scheduling reshuffles circulated through trade press columns and local TV guides, CBS's headquarters in New York began receiving thousands of handwritten letters each week. For context, this was the 1970s, when organized fan campaigns had no digital infrastructure. Each letter represented a deliberate effort. Network staff treated the incoming volume as a measurable pressure signal, with internal communication acknowledging that the response exceeded anything seen since the backlash to the cancellation of Star Trek in 1969. What made the situation operationally significant was that CBS was receiving coordinated insistence that the show remain in its time slot. Moving on. The dark secret behind the theme song. The opening of The Waltons is deceptively simple, a soft, acoustic melody that feels like sunlight over rural Virginia, instantly signaling safety and nostalgia. But the composer behind it, Jerry Goldsmith, was already one of Hollywood's most iconic musical minds. By 1972, he had scored Planet of the Apes and Patton, and would later define the sonic terror of The Omen and Alien. This contrast is the key to understanding why the theme works. Goldsmith originally composed music for the 1971 TV film The Homecoming, A Christmas Story, which introduced the Walton family. When CBS ordered a weekly series, Producers initially pushed for a more conventional, upbeat rural theme to fit primetime expectations. Instead, Goldsmith delivered something stripped down: guitar, zither, and restrained orchestration built around repetition rather than spectacle. Recorded in Los Angeles with session musicians used to large studio scores, the piece avoided melodic complexity in favor of emotional memory cues. Goldsmith was simultaneously scoring high-tension psychological and science fiction films where dissonance, not comfort, was his signature tool. He applied the same precision to the Waltons, essentially reversing his own artistic language. The result was a theme that feels innocent but is engineered with a composer's discipline more commonly associated with suspense cinema. The house that became a television legend. The Walton family home is one of television's most recognizable facades, but it was never a functioning house in the literal sense. Built on the Warner Brothers backlit in Burbank, California, the exterior was designed as a controlled illusion: timber, paint, and framing arranged to sell the idea of rural Virginia during the Great Depression. Inside, there were no rooms, no staircase, and no interior continuity. When characters appeared to look out from upstairs windows, they were positioned on scaffolding and partial platforms hidden behind the structure, carefully aligned with camera angles to maintain the illusion of depth. The concept came directly from Earl Hamner Jr., the Virginia writer whose childhood in Schuyler shaped the fictional Walton's Mountain. Hamner had previously narrated and written the 1971 TV film The Homecoming: A Christmas Story, which served as the pilot for the series when CBS picked it up in 1972. His insistence on authenticity extended to physical space. The house had to feel lived in, even if it could not function as.
One. Production designers built the facade to accommodate long-term filming, reinforcing it for repeated weathering, lighting setups, and seasonal modifications across 9 seasons from 1972 to 1981. The structure eventually became so embedded in Warner Brothers' studio identity that it was reused after the original run, later appearing as the exterior of the Dragonfly Inn in Gilmore Girls. In the 1990s, the original set was lost to an electrical fire, ending the physical landmark but not its visual legacy. Even after its destruction, reruns, reunion films, and archival footage ensured that the image of that white farmhouse remained fixed in American television memory as a symbol of an idealized rural past that never physically existed. Grandma Walton suffered a devastating stroke in real life. In the spring of 1976, the Waltons faced a disruption that no script meeting could have anticipated. Ellen Corby, who portrayed Grandma Esther Walton, suffered a severe stroke in real life. At that point, the show was in its 4th season. Production schedules were tightly structured around ensemble shooting days. Corby temporarily lost speech and mobility, forcing her to withdraw from regular filming. The absence created a structural gap in ongoing storylines. Writers had to rapidly reconfigure scripts, reducing Grandma Walton's on-screen presence while carefully avoiding abrupt narrative breaks that would disrupt the show's internal realism. Behind the scenes, production shifted into an adaptive mode. Scenes were rewritten to place greater emphasis on other family members, particularly Olivia Walton and John Walton Sr. The series, already known for integrating real-life events into its storytelling, now had to mirror recovery rather than simply absence. Corby's eventual return marked one of the most unusual continuity adjustments in 1970s network television. Rather than replacing her character, the show incorporated her recovery into the storyline, allowing Grandma Walton's rehabilitation process to unfold gradually on screen. This decision preserved narrative continuity across seasons 5 and 6. The hit nobody saw coming. Cami Codler, who played the youngest Walton daughter, Elizabeth, described the early production atmosphere as uncertain. However, by late 1972, Nielsen ratings data showed the series steadily climbing in its Thursday 8 p.m. time slot. Instead of losing viewers after its pilot momentum, it began retaining them. This pattern was unusual for a drama with slow pacing and minimal action. Within its first full season, the Waltons transitioned from respectable filler status to award contention, ultimately winning the Primetime Emmy Award for Outstanding Drama Series in 1973. That victory placed it ahead of more aggressively promoted network productions and signaled a shift in how television success could be measured. What CBS had initially treated as a safe, low-risk programming slot had instead produced one of the decade's most durable network anchors. Amazing, no? Well, this next one will surely shock you. John Ritter was in the Waltons. Before John Ritter became one of American television's most recognizable comedic actors in Three's Company, his career path began in a completely different register. In the Waltons, he appeared in 18 episodes as Reverend Matthew Fordwick, a young minister stationed in the fictional community of Waltons Mountain. Ritter's character functioned less as comic relief and more as a stabilizing figure within the Walton ecosystem. He would preside over sermons, weddings, and moments of communal crisis. Filmed on the Warner Brothers backlot in Burbank, California, these sequences were part of a broader ensemble structure that relied on recurring village figures to reinforce the show's sense of continuity and social texture. At this stage, Ritter was still building his professional identity, working steadily in television guest roles rather than leading productions. The turning point came when ABC developed Three's Company, a sitcom adaptation of the British series Man About the House. Ritter was cast as Jack Tripper, a role that required physical comedy precision and rapid dialogue pacing, a sharp contrast to the restrained moral tone of Reverend Fordwick. The transition marked a decisive shift from ensemble drama to high-visibility network comedy, airing in a primetime landscape that reached tens of millions of viewers weekly during the late 1970s. Moving on. The real-life tragedy that changed the show. In 1978, actor Earl Hamner, who played Grandpa Zebulon Walton, died shortly after completing filming for Season 6. Hamner passed away in Los Angeles at the age of 76 due to respiratory failure linked to complications from emphysema. The series was already a major fixture in CBS's Thursday night lineup, watched by millions of households weekly. Hamner's death created an immediate narrative and production crisis. Grandpa Walton functioned as one of the emotional stabilizers of Walton's Mountain, often anchoring scenes with moral reflection and generational memory. Rather than quietly removing the character, the writers made a rare decision for 1970s network television: they incorporated the death directly into the storyline. The Season 7 premiere episode, The Empty Nest, aired in 1978 and revealed that Grandpa Walton had died peacefully while planting tree seedlings on the mountain. The episode unfolds with the family returning to his grave. Filming took place only months after Hamner's passing. The production did not attempt to replace Hamner or recast the role. This moment marked a turning point in how the Waltons handled realism. The surprising truth behind TV's greatest father. Ralph Waite's portrayal of John Walton Sr. carried a level of emotional weight that viewers in the 1970s instinctively recognized as authentic, but few understood how closely it was tied to his real life. Before becoming an actor, Waite earned a Master of Divinity degree from Yale University and served briefly as a Presbyterian minister. He also took on the role of a social worker in New York City. That background shaped the measured cadence and moral authority he brought to Walton's Mountain. But the deeper truth behind his performance emerged from personal loss. In 1964, Waite's eldest daughter, Sharon, died at the age of 9 from leukemia. That event fundamentally altered his relationship with fatherhood, long before he ever stepped into his on-screen role. By the time he was cast opposite Michael Learned as Olivia Walton, he was already carrying an experience of grief that informed the quiet restraint audiences read as wisdom on screen. During the show's 9-season run, Waite appeared in nearly every episode as the family's central authority figure. The series itself, set in Depression-era Virginia and inspired by Earl Hamner Jr.'s upbringing in Schuyler, relied heavily on the idea of moral continuity through hardship. Waite's performance aligned so closely with that concept that critics often described him not as acting a father, but embodying one. Off-screen, Waite's life remained complex and unpolished. He battled with alcoholism and made 3 unsuccessful runs for U.S. Congress in California. John Boy was nearly killed in a motorcycle accident. When Richard Thomas left the Waltons in 1977 after 5 seasons as John Boy Walton, it wasn't just a career transition. It also marked the beginning of a period of uncertainty that briefly pushed him outside the controlled world of Hollywood production. Soon after stepping away from the series, Thomas was involved in a serious motorcycle accident. At the time, he had already become a household name through his work on CBS, where the Waltons dominated Thursday night family viewing from its 1972 premiere. John Boy, as the show's aspiring writer and narrator, was structurally central to the series' identity, making Thomas's departure a significant shift in its narrative architecture. The accident occurred when he was moving between stage work, television projects, and film roles. Reports from the time describe injuries serious enough to raise concerns about whether he would be able to continue performing at the same physical and professional level. While he ultimately recovered and returned to acting, the incident temporarily disrupted the momentum he had built during his years on one of America's most watched dramas. What makes the episode particularly striking in hindsight is how invisible it remained to much of the viewing public. Fans who had followed John Boy's journey through Depression-era Virginia, from writing ambitions to wartime storylines, were largely unaware that the actor behind the character had faced a real-life moment of severe physical danger. Moving on. The child stars who never really said goodbye. When The Waltons ended its original CBS run in 1981 after 9 seasons and more than 200 episodes, most television casts scattered into separate careers and distant public identities. The young actors who played the Walton children, however, followed a different trajectory. Judy Norton, who portrayed Mary Ellen Walton, later became one of the most visible voices describing this unusual post-series bond. Rather than dissolving after the final episode, the group repeatedly reunited for television films and special projects spanning more than a decade. Between 1982 and the mid-1990s, CBS and later network partners produced 6 Walton reunion movies, each bringing back multiple original cast members to continue the family narrative. This meant that characters introduced as children in 1972 were still being portrayed by the same actors well into adulthood on screen. Cast members also regularly gathered for anniversary events, including milestone celebrations in Virginia tied to the real inspiration for the series, Earl Hamner Jr.'s hometown of Schuyler. In 2020, decades after the original series concluded, the cast participated in a virtual reunion benefiting the Actors Fund. While many long-running ensembles experience periodic reunions for promotional purposes, the Walton children maintained recurring interaction across changing decades of television history. Their story effectively extended the life of the series beyond its broadcast endpoint, turning fictional sibling relationships into a long-term real-world association that outlasted the original show itself. The farewell that wasn't acting. One of the most emotionally grounded elements of the Waltons was its closing ritual, the family's overlapping goodnights, a simple exchange that became one of television's most recognizable sound signatures. What viewers often assumed was a scripted stylistic choice actually originated in the real-life childhood of creator Earl Hamner Jr. He grew up in a large household where family members would call out good night from different rooms as the day ended. When Hamner adapted his life into the 1971 TV film The Homecoming, A Christmas Story, which later launched the CBS series in 1972, he inserted this detail almost instinctively. It was not initially designed as a recurring trademark. In early production, it functioned more as a closing moment of authenticity. It was a way to end a story grounded in Depression-era rural life without theatrical resolution. But after the pilot aired, audience response shifted its status. Viewers responded to the overlapping voices as something unusually intimate for network television at the time, where most dramas ended on dialogue cuts or musical cues. CBS quickly recognized its emotional impact and made it a permanent feature of the series' structure, embedding it at the end of nearly every episode throughout the show's 9-season run. Filmed at Warner Brothers Studios in Burbank, California, the sequence became a nightly ritual for millions of American households watching Thursday primetime broadcasts. The repetition of the phrase across seasons created a continuity that outlasted individual plot lines. Over time, "Good Night, John Boy" became a cultural reference point. The day a president couldn't stop talking about the Waltons. In 1992, the Waltons found itself pulled unexpectedly into the center of American political messaging when President George H.W. Bush referenced the series during a public speech at the National Religious Broadcasters Convention. Speaking in the final stretch of his re-election campaign, Bush used the show as a cultural benchmark while discussing family values, contrasting it with the rapidly growing influence of animated television. He said he wanted American families to be more like the Waltons and less like The Simpsons. At that moment, The Simpsons was already a cultural force on Fox, having premiered in 1989 and quickly becoming one of the most talked about animated series in U.S. television history. By invoking both shows, Bush effectively framed a generational contrast between Depression-era idealized family life and contemporary satirical dysfunction. The reference did not remain one-sided for long. Within days, The Simpsons responded directly through an animated rebuttal aired in a rerun episode, featuring a cold open that acknowledged the president's remark and turned it into humor at both the show's and the administration's expense. The exchange became an early example of television directly engaging with presidential rhetoric in real time. This may not seem like a big deal today, but it was far less common in the pre-social media era. What made the moment notable in Walton's history is that it occurred more than a decade after the show's original CBS run had ended in 1981. Despite its conclusion, a Depression-era fictional family from Walton's Mountain became a reference point in a debate about modern American identity, proving that the show's symbolic weight extended far beyond its original broadcast era. Hold tight, though, it only gets more shocking from here. A recast almost nobody noticed. In 1971, CBS quietly aired a television film called The Homecoming: A Christmas Story. It was never intended as a long-term franchise, yet its audience response created an unexpected problem for the network. The ratings suggested continuation potential that the original cast configuration could not easily support under weekly production demands. When CBS moved from a standalone film to a full series in 1972, the first major production decision was not expansion but replacement. Patricia Neal, who had portrayed Olivia Walton in the film and was an Academy Award winner, had previously suffered multiple strokes, and the physical demands of a continuous television schedule made her unable to commit to a long-running series. The role was recast with Michael Learned. She is iconic now, yes, but back then, she was a relatively unknown stage actress. The restructuring did not stop there. Ralph Waite replaced Andrew Duggan as John Walton Sr., shifting the patriarchal presence of the family, while Will Geer took over the role of Grandpa Walton from Enter Bergen, a performer better known for ventriloquism than dramatic television. CBS proceeded with nearly the entire adult cast reassembled before filming the weekly series. Only Ellen Corby, already an established character actress with a long Hollywood resume, carried over from the original film as Grandma Walton, providing continuity amid a near-complete adult recasting. The Waltons and MASH pulled off one of the biggest Emmy upsets in TV history. In 1973, at the 25th Primetime Emmy Awards, the Waltons did something Hollywood had not fully priced in. It beat expectations so cleanly that it redefined how network executives interpreted prestige television. Competing in the Outstanding Drama Series category, it was up against MASH, a sharp, modern war comedy drama hybrid that had already become a critical favorite, and other heavily backed network productions. At the time, industry sentiment leaned strongly toward shows that reflected post-Vietnam, post-Watergate America, ironic, fast-paced, and urban. The Waltons, by contrast, was set in Depression-era rural Virginia and structured around slow domestic storytelling. CBS itself had not positioned it as the obvious frontrunner, treating it initially as a respectable mid-tier entry in its Thursday night lineup rather than a dominant awards contender. The announcement of its win changed that perception instantly. When The Waltons was named Outstanding Drama Series, the victory placed a family-centered, nostalgia-driven rural drama above some of the most modern and aggressively promoted shows of the era. The result was a shock because it contradicted the prevailing assumption that prestige television had shifted permanently toward urban realism and stylistic experimentation. The impact extended beyond the ceremony itself. Following the Emmy win, The Waltons was reclassified in industry reporting from quiet family drama to award-winning flagship series, altering its promotional positioning in both domestic and international markets. The recognition also strengthened its longevity at CBS, helping secure continued renewals through the remainder of the 1970s. In retrospect, the 1973 Emmy outcome marked the moment the Waltons stopped being seen as a sentimental anomaly and started being treated as a defining network institution, escaping the role that defined a lifetime. For Judy Norton, who played Mary Ellen Walton from 1972 until the original CBS run ended in 1981, the challenge began after the cameras stopped rolling. By the mid-1980s, she was still being closely identified with a character who represented moral steadiness and rural innocence in Depression-era Virginia. That long association created a type of career confinement common for actors from high-visibility family dramas, where casting directors and audiences continue to associate the performer with a single identity. Norton later described how difficult it was to access roles outside that narrow perception, even years after The Waltons had concluded its 9-season arc. In August 1985, she made a highly publicized decision to pose for Playboy magazine. The photo shoot, published during a period when she was actively trying to reposition herself in Hollywood, was intended as a deliberate break from the Mary Ellen image that had defined her since her childhood acting years on the series. At the time of publication, she was in her mid-20s. She was attempting to transition into adult roles in a television industry that still strongly typecast former family drama actors. The move generated immediate public attention and industry reaction, not the positive kind. Her career did not shift into the broad mainstream breakthrough she had been aiming for. In the late 1980s and 1990s, she increasingly moved towards stage work, where she had more flexibility. She also worked in made-for-television films and occasional guest appearances, but did not land a sustained network leading role comparable to her Waltons' prominence. Between 1982 and the mid-1990s, she reprised Mary Ellen Walton in multiple television reunion films, which kept her connected to the original ensemble and maintained public association with the role even as she pursued other work. That connection extended into later decades as well, including fan conventions and retrospective appearances tied to the show's enduring syndication presence. Over time, Norton also expanded into directing and writing for theater, shifting her focus away from screen typecasting and toward live performance environments where casting identity was less rigidly defined. In interviews reflecting on her career trajectory, she has described the post-Waltons period as one of transition rather than replacement. The casting change that divided America. When Richard Thomas exited the Waltons in 1977 after 5 seasons as John Boy Walton, the production faced one of its most delicate transitions. John Boy wasn't just another character. He was the narrator of the series, the aspiring writer whose journal framed the emotional perspective of Walton's Mountain. Replacing him meant altering the narrative voice of a show that had built its identity around continuity and memory. CBS and creator Earl Hamner Jr. made the unusual decision to recast the role rather than write John Boy out entirely. Robert Whiteman was brought in during the later seasons, beginning around 1979, to continue the character's storyline after John Boy had been established as a war correspondent and later a publishing professional living away from home. The transition was designed to feel gradual within the story, using letters, phone calls, and brief returns to bridge the gap between two actors portraying the same fictional life. However, the reception was far more complicated. Many viewers immediately noticed the change, and fan response reflected a sense of dissonance, particularly because the Waltons had trained its audience to value familiarity and long-term emotional consistency. The recast disrupted that expectation in a way few other network dramas had attempted at the time. Behind the scenes, the decision also contributed to internal shifts within the cast. Michael Learned, who played Olivia Walton, eventually left the series during its final seasons, and later interviews suggested discomfort with the direction the show took after the transition in key characters. Moving on. Grandma Walton's secret life off-screen. On screen, Ellen Corby's Grandma Walton was one of the most consistent symbols of calm authority in the Waltons. But off-screen, Corby's life carried a very different energy. Born in 1911, Corby entered the film industry in the 1930s, working first behind the camera at RKO and Hal Roach Studios as a script girl before transitioning into acting. Over time, she built a resume spanning more than 200 film and television appearances, including roles in It's a Wonderful Life, Shane, and Vertigo. In 1948, she earned an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actress for I Remember Mama, establishing her as a serious character actress long before television defined her later fame. By the time The Waltons began in 1972, Corby was already a veteran. She was intensely involved in the creative process, sometimes rewriting or adjusting dialogue to better fit her interpretation of a scene. That assertiveness contrasted sharply with the gentle, traditional grandmother she portrayed on screen, the network's hidden control room inside Walton's Mountain. In the 1970s, network television still operated under strict internal content review systems, and even a family drama set in Depression-era Virginia was not exempt. Writers routinely received detailed notes on dialogue tone, moral framing, and even how conflict could be resolved on screen to avoid ambiguity in values presentation. Series creator Earl Hamner Jr. later acknowledged that the show was often shaped by what he called the invisible hand of broadcast approval. Michael Learned also reflected on the emotional strain of sustaining that tone week after week, describing the experience in interviews as living inside a moral pressure cooker where nothing could stay unresolved too long. That structure, while part of the show's identity, required continuous rewriting to maintain emotional clarity without violating network boundaries around content suitability. Even creative decisions around loss, illness, and hardship were carefully moderated. When real-life events affected cast members, the production often had to negotiate between authenticity and what CBS deemed appropriate for a family audience, resulting in rewritten arcs that quietly removed or softened more difficult realities. Well, that's it for now. Thanks for watching. Did you like this video? If you did, please consider liking, dropping a comment, and hitting the subscribe button so that you don't miss out on our new uploads. Also, don't miss this video you see on your screen right now. It's truly unbelievable.